adulthood. It's not that I'm incapable of growing up, though my physical stature might suggest otherwise. It's just that no one ever really made me do it. My older brother stayed close to home and became a doctor, so I was free to run off to Hollywood and become a professional hip-hop dancer / music video hoe. And my parents pretty much took care of everything else. They did my taxes, wrote me prescriptions, convinced a police officer not to charge me with a felony that one time. So there was just no need to be a responsible adult when my parents were responsible for me. But at some point in every parent-child relationship, those roles reverse. The parent becomes the one less socially aware, more confused by modern technology, the one in need of care and protection. And the child becomes the one responsible for that care and protection. This was not the kind of power I wanted to have. I'd rather be able to read minds, or fly, or never suffer a hangover. But about 3 years ago, I had to fly back home to Northwest Indiana for 2 reasons. The first was that a family friend of mine, a little sister to me, was getting married. And the second unexpected reason was that a family friend of my dad's, an uncle to me really, had died, tragically in a car accident. He clipped a semi on the highway, most likely after falling asleep at the wheel. Needless to say, we were all devastated by what had happened, but for me, it was the idea that I could lose my own dad at any moment that affected me the most. I mean, something like this could happen to him too. Was it now up to me to make sure that didn't happen? Was I even capable of doing that? Now, the night that I was flying into Chicago, my dad was also flying into Chicago on his way home from a business conference. The plan was that we were gonna meet at my parents' condo in the city, get dinner somewhere, and then make the hour drive home to Indiana together. But my dad's flight got super delayed, and he didn't make it to the condo until well after midnight. And by then, I had 0 interest in going out to eat. But my dad still really wanted to go. He hadn't eaten all day, and he had his heart set on going to this Indian restaurant where all the cabbies hung out. The fratty, bro-y nature of the place really brought him back to home. So my dad was getting ready to head out without me when my mom called to check in on our status. I told her Dad was going to Delhi Darbar, and I was staying in. And she went silent for a moment, and then said in a very heavy tone, "Don't let him go alone, Rati." Now, I knew that my dad had type 2 diabetes, but what I didn't know was that because of it, he would sometimes just fall asleep if his blood sugar had dropped too low. It simply was not safe for my dad to drive alone late at night on an empty stomach. So I sucked it up and went with him. He immediately got lost on our way there, even though he had driven the route hundreds of times before, but no big deal. I know how to use Google Maps. He then spent the next 20 minutes talking about government bonds and debt restructuring, a lecture I would normally cut off with an, "Oh my God, I don't care, stop talking." But this time I just let him talk as much as he needed to. When we finally got to Delhi Darbar, there was only one parking spot available, and it was really tight and right in front of the restaurant. So my dad slowly and not very surely inched the car back and forth trying to squeeze into it, and in the process, nudged the bumper of the SUV cab parked behind us. I kept asking him if he wanted me to do it instead, but my dad is a man of pride, and he could 100% park his own car. It took him about 20 gear shifts, but sure, he was. When we finally got out of the car, I saw 2 cabbies standing on the sidewalk, pointing and mumbling shit in Hindi. I had no idea what they were saying, but my dad didn't seem at all affected by them, so I figured they weren't talking about us. But then this other Indian dude, tall and husky, not much older than me, came barreling out of the restaurant yelling, "What the fuck, dude? That's my car! You hit my car!" And my dad just kind of shrugged, not really understanding what the problem was. And the cabbie just kept yelling at him. And it was so painful for me to watch, not only as a concerned daughter, but also as a fan of So I stepped in, pointed to the cabbie's perfectly intact and unscratched bumper, and said, look, it was an honest mistake. There's no damage to your car, just calm down. And when the cabbie finally looked at his bumper and saw that there was no reason to be such a bitch, I thought that it was over. Like, I thought I had rested my case. But then the cabbie walked up to my dad, gave him a very hard slap to the back, and said, you better watch it, asshole. So that's when I went off. I told him he would completely cross the line, that there was no reason to call someone an asshole or hit them, especially an old man who meant no harm. And there were a lot of intense arm gestures and finger wagging, all on my part, of course. But thankfully, before things got violent, which they might have, because I seriously would have cut a bitch, the cabbie let it go and went back into the restaurant. And then my dad proceeded to walk into the restaurant behind him. I obviously stopped him and explained that we couldn't eat there anymore because the cabbie and his friends would probably keep harassing us and just wasn't a safe environment for us to be in. And when I said this to my dad, his glasses fogged up, his mouth flipped upside down, and he shook as he said, but Beatty, I'm hungry. And as I looked at my helpless, childlike dad, all I could say was, I'm sorry. And we got back into the car, and we nudged the cabbie's bumper a few more times on the way out. And I found us another Indian restaurant down the street for us to go to. When I was 15, my dad let me drive his car in downtown Chicago. It was only the third time I had ever been behind the wheel, so naturally, I rear-ended a cab. But when the cabbie got out to pick a fight with me, I didn't have to fight him back, because my dad got out and fought him for me. 15 years later, I was the one fighting cabbies for my dad. The roles had reversed. And it scared the shit out of me. A year after this all happened, my dad ended up in the hospital. A very brief stay, but a result of very serious complications of diabetes and high blood pressure. And a year after that, my mom spent 2 months in the hospital battling a rare autoimmune disease that flooded her lungs with fluid and shut down her kidneys. Now my brother is a director at one of the largest teaching hospitals in Chicago, so when that happened, he took care of all the medical responsibilities. But every other responsibility fell onto me. I spent those 2 months back at home managing the entire family and all of its needs, holding my mom's hand and giving her strength, taking care of my dad and making sure he didn't end up in the hospital next to her, micromanaging all the doctors and nurses for my brother while he was at work. I basically had to grow up and be the matriarch of the family. This is still not the kind of power I want to have. It's not easy being in charge of the well-being of another person. It's probably the hardest thing you can do. Which is why I've never really wanted to have kids of my own, but I've suddenly found myself with 2, Mom and Dad. My parents are now the ones in need of care and protection. So I am now the one enforcing strict diet and behavior rules, calling them more often than they probably want me to, telling them not to cry. I've yet to bail one out of jail, but I will if I have to. And anytime we go anywhere, I am always, without question or hesitation, the one sitting in the driver's seat.